We are bringing you team coverage in the trial of Alec Murdaugh. Now, the first week of testimony wrapped up today, all of it painting a picture of the night Murdaugh's wife and son were murdered. Today, mostly focused on specific pieces of evidence collected from around Maggie and Paul's bodies and statements Alec Murdaugh made to state investigators the night of their murders. Fox Carolina's Grace Runkle has been in Walterboro for us all week, and she has more on what was said in the courtroom.
A lot of the questioning today focused on Alec Murdaugh's appearance, especially right there the night of the murders. We even heard him give his first statement to SLED officers, and in it he says he tried to turn over Paul's body. The state, though, is calling that statement into question.
How would you describe the defendant's hands when you saw him when you were interviewing him? How would you describe his hands?
They were clean. Clean.
How would you describe his arms?
They were clean.
How would you describe his t-shirt?
Clean.
How would you describe his shorts?
Clean.
How would you describe his shoes?
They were clean.
This is video of Alec's statement being taken by law enforcement. Remember, the crime scene was extremely bloody because both Maggie and Paul were shot at a short distance with rifles. The state is essentially asking if Alec tried to turn over Paul's body, why is there no blood on him? The defense says that proves their point.
He was clean, correct?
To my visual eye, he was clean, yes.
And to your visual eye, it did not look like he had just blown his son's head off in the confines of a feed room where splatter is everywhere. Isn't that correct?
I didn't say that.
Well, let me ask you, in your mind's eye, that night on June 7th, did he look like someone had just blown his son's head off, spatter going everywhere?
Again, I can't say that for sure.
The defense also brought up several times how willing Alec was in giving over his phone, giving access to his property, and even turning over his clothes the night of the murders. They also talk about how willing the rest of the Murdaugh family was, so that's something we expect them to continue to bring up throughout the trial. Next week, though, we are expecting them to ask SLED agents why they did not search the house. That's something that they've already brought up multiple times, so we're expecting to hear that next week when the trial continues. In Walterboro, Grace Runkle, Fox Carolina News.